I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Abstract Cafe, where ideas take shape, thoughts find depth, and every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. She's the founder of Alchemy Art Workshop, transformative public art, no other than Mr. Christopher Quigley.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Christopher Quigley. I am the Executive Director, Creative Director, and the founder of the national nonprofit organization called Alchemy Art Workshop. And we are producing our inaugural piece called Transformation of Dangerous Spaces, which is meant to confront men with the realities of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Mr. Christopher. And today, let's talk about what happens when men step up accountability, art, and change. So, tell us the phrase step up is active. Beyond just being a good person, what does stepping up actually look like in practice for men in preventing gender based violence?
Well, I would like to start off by giving a bit of a history lesson about where that comes from, where stepping up comes from, and why I'm stepping up and participating. We had a very violent mass shooting here in Canada a few years ago, and the result of that was a mass casualty report that made recommendations to Canada about how to address gender-based violence, gun violence, and intimate partner violence. And one of the major recommendations that came out of that was for men to step up and to take a more active approach. And the word step up was used. Step up and take an active role and use their voices to help solve the issue. And I took that very seriously. And I looked at what my role was. And when we talk about just being a good man, sometimes being a good man just isn't enough. Being a good man doesn't mean that you stay silent. Being a good man doesn't mean that you get to absolve yourself of any knowledge if there's something going on around you. And I looked at my own complicity. And sometimes being a good man can lead to complicity where you're silent with situations that you become aware of. You know, I look at the women that were in my life and some women that were in my life and the abusive relationships they were in where I didn't say anything because I was too scared. That's complicity. I'm still a good man. I'm still a good person, but silence still can equal that kind. Silence equals violence and silence equals complicity. And so I wanted to create something that would let men step up and participate. But before you can step up and participate, you have to acknowledge your role. And so this piece was meant to confront men and have them acknowledge their role and to confront them and to participate in solving the issue.
Why is it inadequate for men to simply non-violent or non-violent? What is the difference between passive non-participation and active prevention?
Active prevention has to start with acknowledgement of the systems that are in place that fail men and now those same systems that end up failing women. The active participation is less of an emergency response or a crisis response and becomes more of a preventative action. And that's what this art piece was meant to do. It's meant to be a preventative initiative, a preventative part of this solving of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence in Canada. And so when I look at what active participation means, it means there needs to be some kind of like interruptive pattern break that gets included in this, because for most men, especially in North America, we are all socialized a very certain way, and women are then socialized in response to that. And so we have to acknowledge how we were socialized, where we understood where the where violence was perpetrated, and I look back on the places where I got beat up, and that was in the bathroom or in the locker room, where women got beat up, where this all happens. We have to acknowledge those spaces before we can actually start addressing how to prevent it moving forward. But young men and even older men and young boys need to actually see where this takes place and how we can interrupt that.
Accountability, art, and change. How can creative expression and storytelling be powerful tools for accountability and social change on this issue?
So there's two aspects to that multifaceted question, is that there is two versions that I have to approach with this. Is that we have art and activism. And art on its own can be a very powerful tool to transform people and to affect them in a certain way, as can advocacy, which is the voice. And so there's action to advocacy, and there's action that takes place. And then when you mix the two, when you mix art and activism, you have the ability to really touch someone's soul. You have a way to be able to get to them emotionally. You have a way to be able to have them kind of understand where they're at and become accountable to their actions and become accountable to the socialization that they've had, so that they can break those patterns to interrupt any future idea of there being any kind of violence being perpetrated. So that's kind of what we look at with all of the pieces that we create that are meant to be a social commentary, but they are meant to be, it's meant to be art and activism mixed into two, and then a level of accountability across all facets of the piece.
Accountability indeed and self reflection. What does accountability mean in the context? Is it about calling out other men or personal reckoning with the inherited biases or both?
We aren't calling out men. I want to be very clear that this piece isn't meant to blame or shame men in any way. All it's meant to do, and it's meant to confront them, and it is a confrontational piece. It's a very emotional piece. It's very interactive, and it's meant to hit people and meant to get at them right down to their bones. Accountability is something that happens outside of this, because I want people to walk away with some level of change that's happened to them, some level of transformation. And we do this with any art piece that we get to interact with. We walk away feeling different than we did when we went in. And so when with this is how we're approaching this. We're not calling anybody out. We're not pointing fingers. We just want men to understand, and young men, especially young men nowadays, because the way that they're being socialized is being done online. We have, these very mediocre men with a microphone and a pulpit that are espousing this very dangerous rhetoric about who to hate, how to hate. And they are doing it behind closed doors in their bedrooms, and they're being fed this information at a rate and at a scale that I don't know if we're really ready to really acknowledge yet. And so there's that accountability, bringing even online platforms into the mix and having them be accountable, because they're monetizing these people that are espousing this hate and this rhetoric and are distributing it. So accountability is across all platforms and across all boards. That's our role with this, is to affect some kind of change, even if it's with one person. That's the kind of change that we need. We need it to start. There needs to be some preventative actions, and this is a preventative piece.
Can you share an example of a time you witnessed a subtle form of sexism or misogyny of intervene effectively?
Oh, being a middle-aged white male in North America, I think we're pretty exposed to it on a fairly frequent basis. Um, I'm not going to divulge any names, and I don't want to betray the trust of anybody, but I have been in situations with a very close friend of mine where her boyfriend would beat her up. And these are kind of this is part of my reckoning with this, is that I didn't say anything where I should have. That her need for me to say something didn't happen, and my fervor and my involvement was sadly lacking at that time. You know, I've been involved in my very first memory that I have as a young boy is when my father, and this is a harder one to talk about. My father, I remember him. I was sitting at the table. I was 4 years old, and he threw a glass of milk in her face, and then he threw a dustpan at her head, and then smashed a rack of glasses onto the floor. I mean, I was only 4. But that's a formative memory. That's a core memory that I have. And so when I'm bringing my lived experience into this piece, I'm bringing all of the lived experience that I have of all the things that I've seen, all the things that I have witnessed, and where I may not have said something, or the jokes that I laughed at when I was in the locker room as a young man. Not saying to a girlfriend that, you know, a friend of mine was maybe not the best person to be hanging out with. There's a reckoning that I am bringing into this piece. There's a lot of personal history, because this piece isn't metaphorical. For me, it's historical. Those are the harder things that I want to be able to bring to the table. Those are the ones that are like those stories, and there are many more, many others that are all incorporated into this. That this is a lived experience piece, my own lived experience.
For a man listening who wants to help but is afraid of saying the wrong thing, what is a simple way to start practicing accountability, Mr. Christopher?
So I'm not very sure about that as a. I'm not very sure, but most recently I was being interviewed by a newspaper, and we were off the record, and this gentleman, the reporter, and I, just to give you some, like, I've done a lot of TikTok stuff, and I get a lot of very weird comments from men that really kind of go after me for what I'm doing. And this was one kind of situation where I was kind of like, it was in my face and I wasn't really prepared for it. I knew how to answer the question that he was asking, because he felt like I was attacking men, that I was blaming men, all men. And I'm not blaming all men. The accountability came later from him when he was like, I'm a 52-year-old man, I'm divorced. And he's like, I really feel like you're blaming all men here. And I said, he's like, I feel like I'm under attack. I feel like I'm constantly under attack. And I said, well, that's a very interesting perception to have. But I said, when you say, that it's not all men, that, women abuse too, it's like, well, that's true. You're right. That's true. But the accountability part comes from when you say the statistics kind of prove otherwise, that most of these situations, if not, the vast majority of the 98%, are perpetrated by men. And so once you actually can accept that, that's the first step of accountability, to go, yeah, you know what, even myself. And I tried to mention to him, I said, look, we've all had some level of complicity, and being able just to acknowledge that complicity is acknowledgement and accountability, and also already starts off the conversation of accountability, that none of us are saints. We all have a role to play. We all have a role to play. And if it's a difficult conversation, talk to somebody, say it to somebody, tell anybody, talk to your priest, talk to your counselor, talk to an employee, talk to anybody. Just say, hey, what do I do in this situation? And there's a way to kind of start the conversation.
Mr. Christopher, how does art, whether film, music, literature, or visual art, uniquely challenge deeply held stereotypes and open up conversations that straightforward dialogue sometimes can't?
So, one of the things with this is that it's very explicit. This art piece is meant to be explicit. And I took something um, uh, from American Sign Language, from ASL, that there is no implicitness to ASL. Everything has to be very explicit. And so when a translator is translating English to ASL, they have to take the implicit and make it very explicit. And that's what I took out of that and applied to this, is that the piece itself, there is nothing implicit about it. It is an incredibly explicit piece. And that's how we are approaching any kind of change within anybody else, is that if with the viewer or with the participant in the piece, it's meant to affect them. And you can only do that explicitly. And so that's, I think that's my answer to that question. I think that's how that's how I feel about that one.
Mr. Christopher, in what ways has traditional art and media historically perpetuated harmful narratives about masculinity and violence, and how are artists subverting that now?
Well, we can only go, and this goes back to an earlier comment, that the way boys are being socialized now with video games and with sports and with gun violence, and just the general din that is constantly coming out of even the United States, just the amount of violence that is being exported from there, that kind of socialization is affecting an entire generation of men. And I don't think they quite understand the scale of it. I keep going back to this, and I don't think that the scale is really understood about how large of a platform some of these people have. But you take a look at video games that have the gun violence, and even video games that have cars that you get to kill a prostitute. Those sort of things build up. It's cumulative. Even just seeing every day the amount of shootings that happen in the United States has a cumulative effect on a person's soul and on their psyche. And sometimes that just needs to be pointed out. There needs to be some level of explicit narrative. There needs to be an explicit narrative that kind of shows this. And the TV shows that have been on that have always degraded women. I think we just have a really, this is like, I feel like I'm a bit like Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill, but I've got a really good crew behind me helping me push it up the hill. Our role is to kind of just point it out and show it as a mirror, to go, hey guys, like, look, this is what's happening. Only we can change this, because if we don't, this is just going to keep going. And going back to what I said before, men created this issue. We have to be the ones that help fix it.
On real participation and active bystanders, what are the most common ways well intentioned men still fall into a trap of permo- performative allyship instead of engaging in real participation?
So in Canada, there are a number of men's organizations that are doing the good work. I think any participation is active participation. I don't believe that any of it is performative allyship. If you are, even performative allyship is still allyship. There are, there's, the Bridges Institute here in Canada and Morris Green's Guy's work that goes and brings a new way of masculinity, or approaching a new way of masculinity with young men in schools. And then there's also in Canada the White Ribbon Campaign, which is an international campaign that is out that addresses intimate partner violence and also addresses the misinformation that young men get about what it means to be masculine or what masculinity is. Um, anything anything that kind of helps shift the needle, even if it's performative, is needed. Anything is needed. It's all needed. It's all required. I don't know how else to kind of shift the needle and to get those kind of that qualitative and quantitative data is just to be out there and to create something that is meant to be preventative alongside other organizations like White Ribbon and Guy's work, amongst many, many, many others. There's Moosehide in Canada. That's another one that does some fantastic work. All of it is good work. They're all doing good work.
Definitely. And what is the most common pushback or resistance you get from other men when having this conversation, and how do you navigate it productively?
The the most recent and the most pushback I get is from men that feel as though I'm betraying masculinity, that I'm betraying men, that the call is coming from inside the house and I'm exposing, or there's this idea that that I'm blaming all men, because I get this, and back, just going back to the other comment that I made with a reporter that was asking me, that was telling me that he felt like he was under attack, and saying that, and the one argument that gets used with me quite a bit is that they always say, women abuse too. And I'm like, yes, you're right, there is, but we're talking, this is a very different, and it's used as a way to divert from the real issue or the real talking points. Because when we talk about this, we're talking about a 97% to 3% statistic here where women are the abusers, but they are. It does come through, but that's not the conversation, because 98 or 97%, it's men. It's always men. And so the most pushback I get is using that argument that it's not all men. It's like, no, you're right. It isn't all men. It's not. That's not something I've done, but I also I've not been a saint. So let's be real. Let's start taking this away from, this idea that men are a victim, like because they're being called out, or that they're meant to be accountable to this. Men aren't the victim here. They're not the ones that are being, it's women. Women are the ones that need to have the crisis intervention, that need the support, that need the funding, that need the transition houses, that need legal support, that need all of this. And this is the stuff that I think men don't quite grasp, or they refuse to grasp, is that this is an entire world and universe that was created in response to the violence that men perpetrate.
Mr. Christopher, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well, geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast law 101 and mental health 101, love letters in the third season, and movie 101 review and music 101 in fourth season, and science 101 and sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them. wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Christopher, finally, what is your call to action? What is the concrete thing you want every man listening to the offer to this conversation?
The call to action is go to our website, take a look at what we're doing, and if you want to be involved, please get involved in any way that you can. Donate time, donate resources. Um, just this is where it's like we have to step up. It's time to step up. Take a role, take a voice. I'm not the only one doing this. Let's the call to action is like just read up, man. Like just take a look at what's going on, understand the realities behind it, and no, it's not you, it's other men. It's just that's just understand that this is a way to kind of help, and any way that you can help is going to be completely acknowledged and appreciated. Even if it's just saying, hey, like, here's my story. Here's what I saw with my mother, what I saw with my sister. Anything helps. It all helps.
Mr. Christopher Quigley, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the
Thank you
world.
very much.
And can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy, your business, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Yep, you can go to alchemyartworkshop.org. That will be there, and all of our initiatives and all of our projects. And there's also a place for a case for support and how to donate. It's all on the website, and every dollar helps.
Every dollar helps. Let's support Mr. Christopher Quigley, because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering advocacy to come. So, Mr. Christopher, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
More to come, people. See you soon.